Your dad comes home one night and he's drunken and starts getting aggressive. The next thing you know, he is hitting your mom. You try to get in between to help and also get smacked around, and once the ordeal is finally over, your dad passes out and you go back to your room terrified, and you go to sleep to the lobby of your mom sobbing all night. The next day you wake up and your dad's back to normal, so you somehow muster up the courage to go up and talk to him. You say, "Dad, I don't like the way we are. I want us to be happier. Can we please do something about this?" See, our dad is our mental science, so he tells you all about the scientifically proven way for you guys to start being happier. He saw the famous study that increasing your income up until $75,000 a year increases your happiness. He is currently making $50,000, so he is going to work even harder this year and stress himself out even more so that hopefully he can get a $5,000 raise, bringing his income from 50 to 55,000, and you guys will be happier. Now, how will you feel about that if you're that kid? And almost everyone that I've ever talked to identifies a little bit with that kid. Maybe not such extent, but still most families are very dysfunctional in their own way, and how about the fact that domestic violence is of course terrible, but how often and how long can somebody realistically hit you once a week, maybe for 5 minutes? If they have good cardio, that's 5 minutes of physical pain a week. That is nothing compared to, for example, the pain of 12 hours a day of having the most horrible thoughts and telling yourself the most horrible things that cause you endless suffering. If you have the luxury of watching YouTube videos for entertainment, chances are you're way bigger problems than needing more money to be happy. I saw it with my own family and countless friends. It didn't matter that our family salary doubled, tripled, quadrupled. We kept being miserable because we had way deeper problems than having more money. It's funny when you point this out. People sometimes say, but it is money. See this $500 bill, see this $100 phone bill. I'm struggling to pay them. Even there, it's still not the money itself, but deeper problems like our terrible habit of always needing to spend more than we can afford. It doesn't matter how much money we throw, that problem we can always outspend our income. In the past, I have sometimes said that making more money is not the way to be happier, and there's always someone to tell you, hey, nice opinion here, but there's some actual science and research up until $75,000 a year your happiness increases, and then it levels off. The promise of the study and everything about it is so silly and overly simplistic. But let's start with why doing a study like this is such a waste of time and money. Let's make a parallel to muscle building. Imagine somebody came along telling you about how sophisticated and scientific their approach was, and following that up with, according to this famous study, you build muscle up to about 75 minutes of doing the elliptical machine, and then it tapers off. We could waste our time and money doing a study like this. We could pretend to be sophisticated by using a logarithmic scale instead of linear scale to answer a silly and unnecessary question. But the only thing we'll be demonstrating is how rudimentary and laughable our fundamental understanding of building muscle is. See, muscle building is a complex, multivariate problem. If you study people with a lot of muscle, you will start to see patterns with some of those variables that include, for example, adequate amounts of calories, adequate amounts of protein, adequate amounts of resistance, training the proper rest, the right genetics, the use of certain substances at high levels. We could go on and on and on with the complicated symphony of these important variables. Now from that sort of approach, that's starting to be actually a little more nuanced, and by the way, which people have known about for decades without spending a dime on a single. The guy telling you all the silly, overly simplistic study of the elliptical machine. It's pretty ridiculous, and at the same time has no awareness. Similarly, happiness is a complex, multivariate problem. What we need less of is people sitting in their offices calling up a bunch of people of weird enough to waste their time participating in a phone survey, asking them weird questions and jotting them down their answers. And what we need more of is people getting out and traveling the world and observing people with deep curiosity and interest. If you actually did that with happiness is running that the overwhelming pattern of the multi-variables affecting happiness would most likely not even include the variable of making a lot of money as an important variable. You will pretty much never see an extremely muscular person not consuming protein or not resistance training, but you will see tons of poor people, especially by the American standards of the study, all around the world, who are some of the happiest people you have ever seen. Just like muscle building, here are some examples of the much more important variables leading to happiness that you might see a pattern of appreciating, that what you have ever graduated a sense of meaning and purpose, having a positive outlook on things instead of interpreting everything negatively, relaxing about life and not being so extremely stressed out about everything, being compassionate and forgiving to yourself and others, having strong relationships and community around you, maintaining a good overall mental and physical health. These are just some examples. We could go on and on and on about this complicated concoction that finally leads to be complicated result of something like happiness. With all that in mind, it's so silly to take something so complex and again bring it down to some unrelated discussion of how happiness is correlated with some random single variable. Not only is it silly, it's also pretty much an impossible question to answer. It's kind of like baking a pie and then once it's baked trying to get a flour, and to be a mission god to be able to isolate something like that. Another social scientist, assuming any sort of correlation anywhere, is always some strong correlation. The reason I feel passionate about this is because recently I was linked to one of these silly studies. Again, there are several iterations of $75,000 studies. Some of them pretend to be more sophisticated than others, but they are all the same overly simplistic approach of looking at extremely complex problem. This time something was different though. I couldn't help but notice the authors of this particular study because both gentlemen have won the Nobel Prize, and I immediately felt a sense of hopelessness. If two Nobel Prize winners can sit down and analyze something so complex and such a simplistic way, then what hope is there for an average person reading these ridiculous headlines. Do not misunderstand how happiness works. The authors of this particular study divide happiness into two categories: emotional well-being and life evaluation. Emotional well-being in a nutshell referring to the joy of sadness you might be experiencing moment to moment, and life evaluation referring to how satisfied you will feel about your life in general. What they found was what the emotional well-being increases up to $75 a year, and then tapers off. Life evaluation keeps increasing even past that. But here's a little glimpse of why none of those correlations matter. Take the conclusion directly quoted from the study. For example, we conclude that high-income boys' life satisfaction. Why would you conclude that if the reverse could also easily be the case that life satisfaction leads to higher income? In other words, that friend of yours that's always negative and has a terrible attitude about life might not be getting promoted all the time, and your other friend who is positive has a great attitude about his life is more likely to get promoted and make more money. It could also be the case that having purpose and goals is what leads to high life satisfaction as opposed to making more money itself, and people who have proposed and set goals are much more likely to achieve more, as a result more likely to make more money. In other words, that poor friend of yours that has made it her life mission to help starving children might have a very high life satisfaction, and your other depressed, suicidal neighbor without any purpose making 6 figures a year might be popping pills just to cope. I mean, we could go on and on. Same thing applies to going from 50,000 to 75,000 and improving your emotional well-being. You could easily argue that, for example, having better mental and physical health is an important valuable, whereas opposed to the money itself, and the more money you have, the better your access to healthcare. Well, here's the thing though, there are two ways to pursue health, and you can pursue health directly, or you can do it in the commonly indirect way of destroying your health while you pursue money, and then once you have the money, using that money to somewhat fix your health. In other words, you can destroy your health trying to make 50,000 or 75,000, and you might be slightly happier at 75,000 because you can afford to undo the damage to your health. But you can also make 40,000 because you took time to take care of yourself and be happier than both of those people, because it could easily be the case that mental physical health is much more important while we're contributing to happiness than the quantity of money itself. And that's just one example. You see how much more complicated it gets very fast. Here's my extremely short analysis of happiness based on a deep curiosity of people around the world. Happiness is a complex, multivariate proposition, and any sort of univariate simplistic approach correlating it to some random variable has to be approached with extreme caution and will most likely be a waste of time and money. Even trying to study happiness with the approach of calling people and asking them a question instantly introduces their problematic association, one that we all agree on the definition of happiness that some random social scientist came up with. For example, you could be miserable pretty much every single moment of your life, but considered happy under the life satisfaction definition. To that the question asked will in fact represent the definition of one of their questions in the study. For example, asking people if they laughed a lot. And any sort of individual will be completely disregarded when it comes to happiness, and we haven't even done anything yet. So there is no perfect way to study something like this complex, multivariate approach, and a genuine observation of what makes people happy around the world would most likely be one of the best ways of going about this. As a result, you will find a certain patterns to occur over and over again, like graduate for what you have a sense of meaning and purpose and other important variables that we have touched on. In fact, what you would not find in parts of Tanzania, for example, with the UHD Awi tribes, is people trying to go from an income of $65,000 a year to $75 a year to stop worrying and increase emotional well-being. And what you will not find in parts of the Himalayan mountains, as another example, is people trying to go from $75,000 to $85,000 to increase their life satisfaction. So let's make this more practical, because the reason you would ever look at studies like this is to probably because you want to know what to do to be happy. Well, asking if I go from a $50,000 to a $55,000 a year will be happier is sort of like asking if I go from doing 50 minutes of the elliptical machine to 55 minutes, will I build more muscle? And the only reasonable answer to that is who gives a shit? Start doing some actual resistance training, eat enough protein and calories, add adequate rest, get to know yourself, and start taking your individual well-being into account and start focusing on those important variables and not some irrelevant correlations and illogical conclusion masquerading as science. And if you want to be happy, do the exact same thing with happiness.